we'll see like a dissolving of borders
Yes.
or the ability to travel back. That, I think a lot of people support that.
That's
idea.
already started happening.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea, like right now, I could go any country on earth, including North Korea. Right now. I mean,
So
this wasn't the case 100 years ago.
This Trump thing that got him elected, one of the things was build that wall, build that wall. Do you think that this is like a retro idea or an idea of like almost like a longing for nostalgia, like a pushing back against technology,
No,
pushing back against progress?
I think it's a pushing forward for the idea of self-segregation and the idea that you should surround yourself with people that you choose as opposed to people that you are forced to surround yourself with. And that people are pack animals, and I shouldn't have to. The idea that me and my neighbors in my building are going to sit down and make a consensus is bullshit. I want to sit down with my friends and make a consensus.
Right, but you're talking about the whole entire United States, like the building the wall between us and Mexico.
But the point
seems to me that they're just wanting to keep out the unfortunate people.
Well, they also want to keep themselves as a cohesive whole, right? So they want to maintain this idea of Americanness, whereas they're being told that Americanness means everyone on earth can come here.
Well, they're not saying that. They're just saying, I mean, no one's really saying that anybody can come here.
A lot of people, I mean, if you're going to, I've never heard any criteria for saying we can't let this group in. There's always some reason for letting each and every group in, and there's never a reason to say no.
Well, the rational filter would be we don't want anyone in here that has an extensive violent criminal history, right?
Or, I mean, it could be levels of education.
Yeah, but levels of education, someone who wants to come to this country, like, this is a country of immigrants. This is a country where people try to do better, right? If you're coming here from somewhere else and you want to come to America, you would be coming here because you want to do better. You want to elevate yourself or elevate your family or give your children an opportunity to be educated in a way that you weren't.
Sure.
That's kind of what this is founded on, right?
It's not what it was founded on. It's what it's become. It certainly wasn't founded on the idea of a country of immigrants. The founding fathers weren't like, yay, immigrants. My hero, Alexander Hamilton, was an immigrant. I'm an immigrant. But certainly, I mean, there's plenty of reasons to have criterion for why people are let in.
But how do you define immigrant, though?
Just because, like, if I'm in a war-torn country, hell yeah, I want to go to America because it's going to be better for me and my family. 100%, that's understandable. That doesn't mean that I'm bringing something to the table to America.
Not always, right? Well, I mean, you can't say that even about someone who comes from a thriving economy like
100%,
England. There's
100%.
a lot of losers who come over from England.
As I said earlier, and they're ugly. Ugly losers. So maybe we should have a looks contest,
but
right?
Isn't this entirely...
You have to be 6 or 10, up 6 or above.
Up a 6?
Yeah.
How do you feel? Do you feel you're a 6?
I think I'm above a 6. You don't think so?
Depends on where you are.
What
if
do you
you
mean?
were in like Holland, the men are all giant and handsome. I think you might not be a 6.
Well, good thing I'm not in Holland.
Don't let any of those people over here.
Yeah.
Don't let
So we got
Sweden people over
Mr.
here.
President, please nuke Holland. They'll probably make them bigger, though.
Yeah.
They're not going to be 20 feet tall.
But yeah, right. They'll grow. Godzilla
Like
people.
those lions.
Yeah, exactly. Under pressure, right? But I mean, but going back to the immigrant thing, I mean, this country, essentially, everyone who is here who's not Native American at one point in time was an immigrant.
Sure, but I mean, there's different types of immigrants. There's the immigrants who try to assimilate, and there's the immigrants who don't assimilate. And just because we've done something...
Assimilate? I don't see anybody walking around with buckskin on, wearing feathers. I mean, there's no one assimilated from Europe.
What do you mean? I've assimilated.
Well, sort of, but I mean, the original people that came here, the original people that came here, if you're going to assimilate, you're going to assimilate with the Native Americans. No one did that.
Sure, they conquered them.
You could say that, yeah.
I mean,
it's more like genocide than conquering, but yeah.
Isn't genocide just when you conquer really well?
Well, yeah, and a lot of it is unfortunately because of disease.
Well, it's also the fact, I mean, the idea that it's genocide, I mean, these Native Americans were tough cookies. I mean, these were not these like nature hippies that they're made out to be. I mean, there's the reason the baseball teams are Native Americans because they were, I mean, they chopped up, what's her name, the one who founded Rhode Island. I mean, we know the rock she was hiding behind before she got scalped. So they were tough, warlike populations, many of them. So, but the idea that just because we're this, you know, there are many immigrant populations means we have to continue being that way, that's not really a good argument.
Well, it's not really an argument. I'm just saying that we are essentially founded by immigrants. Not saying we have to keep doing that, but this is what we became.
But we came
here from somewhere else. Everyone came here from somewhere else.
Sure,
right?
but we were founded by immigrants from like very specific places. Now, whether that's good or bad is a separate issue, but the idea that, you know, the founding fathers, some of them were from Syria and some of them were from Venezuela is not true.
Right, they were mostly from Europe.
Mostly specifically from British-speaking Europe.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, but there were still plenty of immigrants from Germany, plenty of immigrants from
Yes.
Czechoslovakia and Poland. Poland was a huge immigrant population early in the birth of the United States, right?
Right, but and they were thinking of making German the official language because they hated the British so much at one point. And there's still huge German-speaking populations. But I think this argument is much more complicated than people will make it out to be. And the idea that, like, you know, we're going to have complete open borders without consequences is crazy. And listen, my mom still lives in a Russian neighborhood in Brooklyn, and it's a very different place from the rest of New York. And I think that's a good thing. But so the idea that it's not a thing at all is false.
Yeah, well, you can't say it's not a thing at all. So is the question whether or not the consequences of open borders are worth the eventual gain of some sort of egalitarian society where everyone has the opportunity to advance?
Well, I think a lot of times when people are on the left, they don't think of costs. They think if this is a good thing, we don't have to worry about the cost, and it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And then when you bring up the cost, like they're saying, well, you're a terrible person. It's like, sometimes the cost is worth it, but you have to acknowledge that there is a cost. Like we're seeing this right now with transgender athletes. When people are like, well, what happens when someone who's grown up male is fighting someone who's a female? Like, this is something we have to grapple with. It's like, oh, you're making up imaginary scenarios. Like, this is happening now. Like, maybe it's the right thing to do, but you still have to consider what are the costs.
Yeah, and radical inclusive progressivism is there are no differences. There's no difference between gender.
Right.
There's no biological difference in gender.
So you know, fundamentalists believe in creationism, that God created, you know, the world in 7 days. They have their own creationism, which is that everyone was created equal and remains so.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't work when it comes to combat sports, for sure. I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't work in any aspect. I mean, if I grow up my dad's and my parents are lawyers, not that they are in real life, I'm going to certainly have that background and that advantage that other people don't have. Now, that might be a good thing or it might be a bad thing, but it's a thing.
Yes, it is a thing, especially if you want to continue in that business.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the idea of that we come from an even position, that we're all the same starting line is pretty preposterous.
Correct.
The idea is just, I mean, if you want to, like, you can't fix that. You can't change that. That is what it is.
And you shouldn't want to change it.
Right. What you should try to do is make the best out of whatever hand you've been given.
Right. Right.
But I think if you want to look at this country and the real issues that we face, they're multifaceted. But one of the biggest ones is that there are some areas of our country that continue to have people that are impoverished and in crime-ridden areas, and these areas don't ever change.
Right.
And that's one of our biggest problems. I mean, we're so concerned with all these different issues and all sorts of valid issues that are happening all over the world. But the issues of our own impoverished communities that continue to be impoverished, south side of Chicago, you know, horrible areas of Texas, there's some areas that just don't get any better.
Right.
And they stay that way generation after generation after generation. And there's not enough interest in them in terms of like broad mainstream focus where they say, look, we have to dedicate and allocate a massive amount of resources to fixing these inner cities. And maybe just one project, one Flint, Michigan style project where they say, listen, let's just dump X amount of time, resources, money, and engineering, figure out some way to fix these areas, provide jobs, make things more safe, you know, establish community centers, do something. And let's see if we can do that and have it one case study, one impoverished city, see if you can bring it up, and then once you do, move forward and try this in other places. I've always said, like, the best way to make America stronger is to have less losers. Like, what's the best way to have less losers? Well, one way is to give people more of a chance. Give people, like, if you grow up in suburban Los Angeles and you live in some nice neighborhood, in, you know, Studio City or something like that, and it's fairly safe, and you have a much higher likelihood of success than someone who grows up in a crime-ridden, drug-filled environment where people are constantly going to jail, and those sort of recurring cycles of poverty and crime. They happen generation after generation after generation. And in some cases, like in Baltimore, there's like clear evidence of systematic racism. You know, that literally people were stopped from buying houses in certain areas, stopped from moving into areas. But in other areas, it's like, it's just almost like it does it itself because these people...
Right. Right, and I always have this litmus test for people to find out if they're left wing or right wing. So people like to pretend I'm neither, I'm both. You ask them, are some people better than others? And if you're right wing, you're going to say yes. And if you're left wing, you're going to start babbling a whole speech.
Better in, like, what does better mean?
Whatever you think, in any sense of the word.
Better at sucking dicks?
Some people
are better.
Some people are clearly
That's
better.
what I hear. But what causes that?
Well,
some people are like, no, they just need to learn how to suck dicks better.
Right. And not everyone, I don't, this is not a road I know enough about to go down.
Oh, how dare you. Okay, let's say play the flute.
Right.
Instead of the skin flute, a regular flute. Some people are better at it, right?
Some people are better at math. Some
Right.
people, and that's going to be a function of the mind, you know, and that's something that not everyone's going to be able to be equally good at. And you have to start with that point that we were born with different gifts.
Or we have different interests and we pursue those with different focus and determination. Yeah, I mean, there's certain things like guitarists. Like there's no doubt about it. There's something like Stevie Ray Vaughan, Jimi Hendrix, Gary Clark Jr. There's people that have like an exceptional ability to play incredible music out of a guitar. What is that? I mean, where's that coming from?
Well, it's also, you and I are both self-taught. I'm sure you didn't major in podcasting. I never took an English course, you know, and you've had many different careers over your life. So have I. And that's just a function of the self.